Tonight we're going to discuss the Asian Sea Trading Network, in other words, the Indian Ocean and Pacific Ocean along the Asian coast. And Objective 30 is the impact the Europeans had, or the attempt the Europeans made to infiltrate this sea trading network. So you can number your notes 29 and 30. Okay, so the Asian Sea Trading Network has 3 key zones. All the way to the left or the west, we have Arabia, and that was mostly run by the Muslims, the Middle East. Then in the center, we have India, and all the way to the right or the east, we have China and Japan and the East Indies. So Arab, Indian, and Chinese are our 3 zones of trade. Take a minute to look over what goods are being traded from these regions. They are kind of a continuity. So, for example, China is still trading silk and precious metals and tea, and they're still getting cloth like cotton from India and spices from India and the East Indies, etc. And so the Indian Ocean is the main route for this trade to happen. And on the map to your right, you should label each zone on the right of your notes. Okay, so our 3 major zones have some key goods that they're known for. The Muslim or Arab section all the way to the west trades glass, especially blown glass. Carpets, they're well known for their tapestries and carpets. Tapestries are kind of like carpets that you would hang on your wall. They're embroidered. India is in the center, and it is still well known for producing cotton. And China is all the way to the east and produces paper, porcelain, like fine china, and silk. Africa, Japan, and the East Indies are involved, but they don't necessarily have a key good, but spices in the Indies, etc. But they do benefit and participate in this. So, before the 1400s, leading up to the 1400s, the situation is that monsoon winds and the limited ship technology dictated that the routes be along coastal regions. So the sailing happened along the shoreline to avoid unpredictable open seas and long trips. That way they could make frequent stops. They didn't need a bunch of fresh water or fresh food. And there are 2 main characteristics. One is that there's no central control. So there's not one government running the system. They don't pay a tax to it. Instead, everyone kind of works together. So there's not one more powerful entity over the others. There's no military presence. There's not a navy. And we don't have India patrolling the waters around India, for example. And then lastly, everyone, all the Asian sea traders had something they wanted from the others and something to offer. So this made it pretty egalitarian. So trade is peaceful. Everybody benefits. It's mutually beneficial, and that way nobody's afraid of the other group. So again, it's difficult to trade if someone thinks you're going to kill them. So pay attention to these general characteristics as we go into Unit 3 and look at the current situation in history, because someone or something is going to take control of the trading network. So keeping in mind what we just talked about with the Asian Sea Trading Network before the 1400s, now we're going to see a shift and look at, in the 1500s, what happens when the Portuguese arrive. And so several factors lead the Portuguese to enter the system forcibly, meaning they use force to enter rather than diplomatic means. So the first is mercantilism. Keep in mind, mercantilism is competitive. It means as a European nation, you want to get the most gold. And so Spain is also practicing mercantilism in their colonies in the Americas, etc. And so mercantilism stresses power based on how much silver and gold a monarch has. So the Portuguese didn't want to send silver to Asia, but they did want to trade with Asia. So they had to figure out how to buy Asian goods without giving the Asians money, because they wanted to have as much silver as they could, competing with other European nations. Additionally, the Portuguese were worried that trading silver would enrich enemies, especially the Muslims, meaning they would get rich off of the trade and be able to take advantage of the Portuguese. Remember that one of the key reasons for sailing south around Africa and this exploration in the first place is to avoid dealing with the Muslims, who are the gunpowder dynasties at this time. They have a very contentious relationship with Europe. Also, the Portuguese, remember, it's that small sliver of land on the Iberian Peninsula next to Spain. So Portugal doesn't have much else of value besides silver to trade with Asian merchants. It's not like Portugal is a resource-rich country or has a lot of farmland. And this is really true of a lot of European nations. And the Portuguese had superior ships and superior weapons to the countries of Asia, Southeast Asia, India, etc. And so they saw this opportunity to go in and force trade upon the Asian Sea Trading Network rather than trading a fair trade. So by the early 1500s, the Portuguese were capturing towns along trade routes with their military. They wanted a monopoly over key Asian products. They wanted Spain and the other countries of Europe to have to go to the Portuguese to get goods from Asia. So there was European competition, though. Of course, the Portuguese couldn't just get away with this without some resistance. So they were not able to maintain their monopoly on the Asian products. The Dutch and the English fought back. Remember, there's a Dutch East India Trading Company and a British East India Trading Company. So it's actually more, rather than the governments, it's companies with their own military that are fighting back and giving resistance to the Portuguese. And the Dutch and English get the upper hand because they work on trading by more peaceful means. So they seek to actually gain favor of the port cities in Asia, so that the port cities in Asia would rather deal with them than the Europeans. I recommend you look on page 488 in your textbook. There's a map of the different regions in the sea trading network, Asian Sea Trading Network, that each European country was able to gain control of. So Portugal starts out strong, but quickly faces too much competition to stay in that position of strength. I'm going to switch the slides. So the Europeans often set up tribute systems. We are going to talk tomorrow in class comparing the influence of Europe in the Americas with that in Asia. So keep in mind how this is different from what the Europeans did in Americas. So controlling inland was not as easy as controlling the coast. So the Europeans tended to keep their military power and their port city, the control to the coastlands. This is kind of like in the early stages with Africa. Asia, again, has been interacting and been part of the world stage, so they already have established armies, unlike in the Americas where the Indians were not used to working together against a larger force, so they might have had small armies, but nothing compared to what Asia had. So this eliminated the European weapons advantage, the numbers, basically. Asia, China had many, many, many soldiers, and even compared to the superior weapons of the Europeans, that evened it out, even the playing field. And then where control was established, tribute systems were put in place. So the Europeans didn't want to have direct leadership or direct governance over these kind of colonies, these trade ports. Instead, they demanded tribute. So indigenous leaders were left in place. They said, you can stay leading, your systems can stay the same, but you have to pay tribute. So this should sound familiar to when we studied the Mongols and the Aztecs. Many, and even the Chinese, established a tribute state in Japan. And so we see this as kind of a common structure when a region conquers another region, but doesn't want to put in a government in place. So in this case, the tribute was agricultural products grown using forced labor, so either cotton or tea or spices, etc., etc. And so Europe kind of didn't have to pay a lot of money to get these goods from the Asian regions. And so that is how the Europeans kind of went into Asia and took control of the trade and really made a shift. And we'll dig deeper into this tomorrow, but be ready to discuss it. It's going to be one of your change in continuity essay prompts. So that's all I have for you. Have a good night, and I'll see you tomorrow.